Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Exploring Delinquencies, Utility Stories, and Key Takeaways from the Raftelis Delinquency Questionnaire. My name is Samantha Brown with Raftelis, and I'll be facilitating today's presentation. We thank you for joining us, and we're very excited to share the next hour with you. Our presentation today is one of several webinars that we've hosted through 2020, but today's topic is extremely relevant and timely. Before we begin, we just want to review a few housekeeping items with you. For today's presentation, all attendees are placed in listen-only mode, but as a precaution, we also ask that you mute your line to ensure as little interruption as possible for our speakers. We want today to be as beneficial for you as possible, so we invite you to use the Q&A box to ask questions for our presenters at any time during the webinar. I'll be monitoring questions throughout the session, and we'll try to address as many as possible during our panel discussion at the end of the presentation. Any questions we don't have time for, we will certainly follow up after the webinar with responses. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing through Raftelis's website. We'll share a link with you in the days to come, in addition to a brief survey summary at a later date. We have a lot to cover today and know there's a lot of interest in this topic. Most of our time today will be spent reviewing survey responses regarding delinquencies, revenue impacts, and customer assistance programs. But we'll then hear directly from 3 utilities regarding their experiences and responses to COVID-19. Finally, we'll conclude with a panel discussion and opportunity for questions. Again, as a reminder, please use the Q&A feature to ask any questions you may have throughout the presentation. I'd now like to introduce our speakers for today, all who are industry leaders and well recognized for their work within the utility space. John Mastracchio and Henrietta Locklear are both vice presidents with Raftelis. And joining us from utilities across the country, we have Sylvia Amparano. Sylvia is the deputy director of Tucson Water in Arizona. We have Michael Lamfreschi. Michael is the Director of Finance and Project Controls at Gwinnett County Department of Water Resources in Georgia. And finally, Karyn Riley. Karyn is the Director of Intergovernmental Relations for WSSC Water in Maryland. At this time, we'll begin our presentation, and I'm happy to introduce Piper Brandt, CEO of Raftelis, for a brief welcome.
Thanks, Sam. Just want to give a little background. This survey grew out of several other projects that Raftelis has been a part of that really spell out our work on creating pathways and programs that address affordability while ensuring funding solutions for utilities that must invest in employees and infrastructure. It's a balancing act for utility leaders who are highly aware of the fragile economic situation facing significant portions of their communities. Well before 2020, our clients were pushing for creative solutions to this problem. And we're going to see in the survey results where some of those solutions are being tried out. We've been highly active in this arena for some time, helping EPA develop policy recommendations for affordability assessments and assisting utilities that serve communities with significant numbers of underserved, low income, fixed income residents to develop rate structure alternatives and other programs that address these needs, like our work in Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C. Raftelis is fully committed to helping the industry and our clients successfully navigate affordability challenges. COVID-19 hasn't changed the conversation. Rather, it has accelerated the discussion and brought a lot more people to the table. Next slide, please. Among those that have been at the table for a long time are the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies and the National Association of Clean Water Agencies. Both AMWA and NACWA partnered with Raftelis to help get the word out about this research effort. And we greatly appreciate them using their platform and megaphone to urge utilities to share their data. To our utility friends, we know you are getting requests for surveys and data constantly. We want to deeply thank all the utilities that participated in the survey. One of the things that makes me proud to serve those in the water sector is how willing people are to share and learn from each other. And I also want to thank all those that are taking time today to participate in this webinar. certainly want to use this as an opportunity to share information as well. Now with that, I want to turn it over to John Mastracchio, who together with the team from Raftelis really launched our work related to COVID-19 back in March, way back when we were all just trying to make sense of Zoom calls and what social distancing meant. So John, I'll turn it over to you to set the stage for what we've seen over the last 9 months.
Thanks, Piper. Yeah, I'm going to provide just a little bit of context in terms of where we've come from and some of the research that's been done in the past. And I'm going to focus on the report that was put together for American Water Works Association called The Financial Impact of COVID-19 Crisis on the U.S. Drinking Water Utilities. So you can go to the next slide, please. So this was this study was done earlier this year, completed back in April, and it was the first look at the financial impact that COVID pandemic would have on U.S. drinking water utilities. And our preliminary research and the survey we did at that time indicated that there would be some considerable impacts on water utilities from reductions in commercial water demands and revenues, somewhat offset by some increases in residential usage, and higher bill delinquencies tied to unemployment and changes to customer shutoff policies. In total, at that time, we predicted an impact of as much as 17% on the revenues of drinking water utilities and a total dollar impact of approximately $15 billion due to COVID. So if we fast forward now from April, when that report was completed, to now we're in December, luckily the financial impacts haven't been as widespread as was originally predicted. And we think most likely that was due to the impact of the federal stimulus known as the CARES Act that provided extended unemployment benefits to those whose jobs were negatively impacted. While the federal stimulus mitigated some of those impacts, there were some water utilities that were and continue to be significantly negatively impacted from revenue reductions due to water demand declines and also due to customer bill delinquencies and collection-related issues. And those bill delinquencies and shutoff moratoriums continue to be a challenge for many water utilities. Next slide, Sam. So here are a few examples from some recent articles that highlight the issue. The top one here is from an example in California, the Marin Water District, where bill delinquencies have risen to about 10% of all bills at this point in time. And then down below, that's from the Washington, D.C. area, WSSC has reported over $58 million in delinquent bills. And we'll hear a little bit more from WSSC a little bit later on in the program. So with the normal average long-term bill delinquency rate, which has traditionally hovered around 0.5%, and some communities experiencing rising long-term bill delinquencies exceeding 5 to 10% of all bills, it's a continued challenge worth examining, worth discussing, and that's really what we plan on doing today with some survey responses and then some examples from other utilities in terms of what they're doing to address the challenge. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Henrietta, who will walk through our recent survey results.
Thanks, John. When we announced the webinar, we had several questions come in from utilities that were kind of outside the scope of our questionnaire and were forward-looking, and we're going to address some of those at the panel at the end of the presentation today. So moving on, we were to the next slide. We were fortunate to receive questionnaire responses from a wide range of utilities. And you can see on the next slide, while most of our respondents hailed from the Southeast region of the US, we also had a significant portion of responses from utilities in the Western states and representation from the Midwest, Northeast, and even a utility from Canada. In terms of size, when we grouped utilities by AWWA size based on water production, you can see we also had all sizes represented. And finally, responding utility service areas were also diverse, reflecting a range of community median household incomes, or MHI. MHI is a commonly used component of affordability studies, as many of you will know, because the data are readily available and it's an easy benchmark to understand. So you'll see several of our graphs coming up that reference results with respect to MHI. We'll turn first to delinquency and revenue impacts reported by our respondents. So we wanted to know what concerns utilities had in their own words regarding affordability. While some participants did not respond to this question, fully 25% of respondents already had concerns before COVID started. And as we know, the crisis has worsened the outlook for many, many communities. Looking at delinquency, our respondents experienced dramatic increases in delinquency as of the point of this survey, as measured by the percent of bills over 30 days past due. This is an expected result, but it really hammers home that utilities have had significant changes in delinquencies rates. This is just the average for participating utilities, and you can see that column on the right, 28% increase in delinquencies over 30 days past due. When we grouped the responding utilities by MHI, by region, and by size, we noticed some interesting trends with respect to where delinquencies increased the most. We found that on average, from 2019 to 2020, delinquencies went up the most in lower income communities, over 80% increase on average. These are utilities that might already have had higher delinquency rates or were more distressed in general to start with. In the South, delinquencies up over 40% on average, and among larger utilities, over 60%. For a large utility, these huge increases represent a large number of customers, just in raw numbers, that are delinquent on their bills. We asked utilities how their revenue collections changed versus their budgeted amounts to gauge the impact of COVID-19 on utility revenue. Most reported that revenues either decreased or stayed about the same. A very few experienced revenue increases, and from their other responses, we could tell they had some special circumstances. Again, when we group utilities by MHI, by region, and by size, we noticed some other interesting trends with respect to where revenues changed the most. So here they are. On average, from 2019 to 2020, revenues decreased the most in low MHI areas, the most in the Northeast, and the most among larger utilities. Going to the next slide. On the right-hand side of this slide, you can see average impacts on revenue. The majority of utilities reported experiencing a decrease or about the same in revenues compared to budget. On average, this was roughly $3.8 million in decreases. But as shown on the previous slide, there were several smaller utilities who reported an increase in revenues compared to budget. And on average, these revenue increases amounted to roughly $4.5 million. On the individual level, the range in revenue impacts was wide, with the largest revenue decrease reported at just under $25 million for that period, and the largest revenue increase reported being just under $14 million. And when we total the impacts for just our surveyed utilities with budget compared to actuals, at that point in August, the revenue decreases were over $79 million, and the revenue increases were less than half that at $36 million. Our questionnaire also included questions regarding customer assistance programs and the changes to those programs that might have come as a result of COVID-19. Many utilities modified programs or adopted new policies to offer additional help to customers in need. Many utilities modified their customer assistance offerings. These ranged from developing entirely new assistance programs to temporarily changing rate structures or offering payment programs with more favorable terms. Some changes, like shutoff moratoria, were mandated responses. Sample responses from anonymous utilities A through D show some different approaches to assisting customers. This graphic shows the types of assistance offered, and many utilities offer more than one program. Among utilities, the most frequent offerings include payment plans, followed by leak adjustments and penalty forgiveness. These top programs are relatively easy to implement and explain to customers, and can be modified quickly in response to changing needs. Additional programs such as crisis or conservation assistance and low-income rates are also seen for several responding utilities. Despite the fact that payment plans are the most frequently offered customer assistance program, compared with 2019, 2020 saw large decreases in the use of this cap, while delinquencies went up among utilities. We believe that other utility responses, like the suspension of shutoff, made plan enrollment less essential for customers. Though payment plan participation fell, utilities did see significant increases in the numbers of customers seeking assistance. Interestingly, the increase in percent participation in these programs was greater in higher MHI communities on the right-hand column than the also significant increases in lower MHI communities on the left. There was an increase of over 250% participation in assistance programs in the higher MHI areas, compared with 132% increase in participation among lower income utilities. The responses to COVID-19 varied, but there were some common themes among our respondents. Utilities took actions aside from customer assistance program changes to help customers and ensure financial and operational sustainability through the crisis. We noted that utilities took short-term actions like shutoff suspensions and waiving late penalties, but they also took potentially far-reaching actions that will affect us later, such as reducing the amount of planned rate increases or even reducing rates. There were also many different responses to COVID-19 in terms of ensuring the safety of utility employees and the financial viability of the utility. Like businesses and their own customers, utilities made many changes to operations to respond to the pandemic. Sample responses from anonymous utilities shown here show some common themes. Strategies included changing in-person services, having employees work from home, and operator changes. Notably, as the April survey that John talked about found, utilities are having to delay capital projects and freeze hiring, which will have down-chain economic impacts in their communities. Customer behavior and demand changes have also impacted utilities. We'll just touch on a point or two here. Here you can see reported trends in water production. Overall, many reported that water production hasn't changed. See the bottom column, or the bottom row. An equal number reported increases versus decreases in production, and this has been a common trend across the industry. However, utilities saw shifts in demand among customer classes, even if they didn't see overall production changes. You'll see here that the residential demand shifted up, the column on the left, while commercial shifted down, the column in the middle, as businesses and other organizations were shut down. Our industrial increases here that you can see in the column come from some utilities with unusual shifts in usage because they operated in areas that were uniquely demanded or not negatively impacted by COVID. But we realize that many factors like weather play here too, as you'll hear from one of our panelists. One of the things we wanted to know was the picture for production versus revenues. And you'll see the utilities in the two left columns are really feeling the squeeze with increases in production, but the same or decreased revenue. But the results were far from uniform across our respondents. We learned that delinquencies increased dramatically for bills over 30 days, most significantly among utilities serving lower MHI areas. For many, revenues decreased or stayed about the same, but what will the long-term picture hold? Utilities are taking a multifaceted approach to COVID response, from changing their programs to adapting finances and operations. And now I'll turn it over to the first of our esteemed utility presenters, Sylvia Amparano, Deputy Director of Tucson Water.
Thank you, Henrietta. Good afternoon, everyone. Tucson Water serves 730,000 people in the Tucson metro area. We have 232,000 accounts, both inside and outside the city limits. We operate both a potable and a reclaimed water system. Tucson is in the Sonoran Desert, where we normally receive less than 12 inches of rain a year. This summer, however, we had 100 days of 100-degree plus heat, so overall consumption is up over last year. Single-family residential consumption represents over half of the total consumption and is up approximately 7%. Reclaimed water production and consumption is also higher, and commercial consumption is slightly down about 3%. We expect revenues to exceed budget. However, collections of those revenues will be slower than normal. Next slide. So Tucson Water is a department of the city of Tucson, and we bill on behalf of the city environmental services, which is garbage and recycling, and Pima County wastewater. We bill more than $400 million for the 3 utilities annually. We've had a moratorium on locks since mid-March, and there will be no water shutoffs through at least the end of December. From the start of the pandemic, the director's office receives a daily dashboard to track billings, receipts, delinquency rate, and cash balances to carefully monitor the utility's financial condition. The graph you see on this slide is one we see every day. Our normal delinquencies pre-COVID were around $3 million any given day, and now we're up over $8 million. It has steadily climbed over the last 8 months. No late fees have been assessed through the same period, and the loss of revenue is estimated at $2 million. We have seen around 2,000 more accounts, or 9% increase in customers in delinquent status. We were also asking for a 4% rate increase last year for this fiscal year, but that did not occur. With the economic and societal uncertainty associated with the COVID-19 pandemic, and with the city's leadership increased focus on equity and affordability, the utility has forecasted its financial plan under a range of potential future rate options that include the potential for no increase for a second consecutive year, for fiscal year 22. Staff has developed a spending plan to reduce our operating and maintenance budgets by $10 million. And this will basically keep our O&M budget flat for 2 years. This range of possible planning outcomes, coupled with the real-time revenue and expense tracking and management decision-making, provides Tucson Water with the needed flexibility to operate the utility in a financially sound manner and well within its financial metrics. Next slide. So what are we doing to help our customers? Tucson Water has offered a low-income assistance program for many years. This year, we changed it to a tiered low-income assistance program that provides a certain percentage off their bill depending on the last 30 days of income. Participants have increased by 550 customers, or 12%. We thought that amount would be higher, but based on our lower call volume, we believe customers are not yet paying attention until we resume locks. The city of Tucson received $95 million in Corona relief funding, and mayor and council have allocated a portion to help customers pay their utility bills who have been negatively impacted by COVID. Initially, they provided $5 million for rent, mortgage, and utility assistance, and this was administered by our housing department, who used a few nonprofits to screen the applicants. The application process opened in August, and they quickly received over 4,000 applications. Based on that need, mayor and council allocated another $3 million. They also allocated $1.5 million specifically for small business utility assistance. Because these funds were tied with rent and mortgage assistance, there was a cap of $3,500 per household. Tucson Water did not see a lot of revenue coming in from that program. Of the utility payments that were made, 15% was for water, garbage, and sewer, and 75% was for the electric bills. Just 3 weeks ago, Mayor and Council gave direction to the city manager to provide more funding in preparation of resuming locks. The city will be providing up to $500,000 for each utility to help customers pay half their bill if they agree to get on a 12-month payment plan for the remaining balance and prevent any disruption in service. It will be a very expedited online application form, and we hope to get that live this week. And the customers will have to self-certify that and provide some income information. They have to meet 200% of federal poverty level and state the reason why they were negatively impacted by COVID. The amount will be treated as an adjustment to the customer account and a reduction in revenue. We partnered with our local utilities and Pima County to develop a communication plan and a consolidated website to manage the same information and provide all available resources. We hope to help as many customers as we can with these programs. Thank you for the opportunity to tell Tucson Water's experience on managing delinquencies through the global pandemic. Next up is Michael Lamfreski from Gwinnett County Water Resources.
Thank you, Sylvia. Gwinnett County Water Resources is located just northeast of Atlanta, Georgia, and provides wastewater, water, and stormwater services for just over 1 million residents. We provide an average of 90 million gallons of water and treat an average of 60 million gallons of wastewater every day with an annual budget of $350 million. Our COVID 2019 impact began with a moratorium on disconnects and late fees that started on March 15th, 2020. This resulted in a 128% increase in our accounts receivable balance, which increased from $800,000 to $2 million during the March to June timeframe. Then on July 15th, we reactivated disconnection notices and late fees for all customers. This resulted in a reduction of our accounts receivable balance from $2 million back down to our normal levels in just 1.5 months. This showed us that most customers were able to pay during the moratorium, but were putting off paying account balances due to no negative impact to their service. On August 15th, disconnects resumed for all customers where their accounts were 30 days past due. During the time of resuming disconnects, we provided the following customer communications. We made phone calls to impacted customers, letting them know about their pending disconnection. We referenced customers to nonprofits offering payment assistance if needed. We dismissed late fees and disconnect notices if payments or partial payments were made by August 15th. We also waived all $50 lock-off fees if a customer was disconnected in the next 30 days. We also sent an additional postcard notification by mail, noting past due balances and reminding customers of their due date for partial or full payment to avoid disconnection. So all of these measures resulted in a large reduction to lock-offs. Typically, we disconnect about 20,000 customers annually, but so far through November of 2020, we have only locked off 9,000 customers. All the actions taken by our utility during this time reduced our late fee and lock-off revenue by about $1 million for the current year. So residential and commercial revenue, they lags behind 1 month due to billing, but in April, we saw a 15% increase in residential consumption with another 5% increase in May. Overall, since March of 2020, residential revenues are up 3% above our normal rainfall impact. Over the same period, commercial revenues dropped an average of 16%. System development charges or impact fees dropped from March to June by an average of 35%. We believe that this was due to the initial governor-ordered lockdown and quarantine procedures. These revenues have since picked back up significantly starting in August, and we have surpassed our annual revenue target. This is signal to us that construction has still continued strong during COVID-19 and progressed in Atlanta. Next slide. The overall estimated net impact of COVID-related revenue reductions on Gwinnett County Water Resources is approximately $10 million. The largest impact is commercial consumption, which is down an average of 16% during 2020. This reduction in revenue is estimated to be $20 million over the 10-month period since March. However, residential consumption is up overall 3% for the year, and this increase of $10 million offsets the commercial impact. So rainfall in the Atlanta metro area is up almost 100% over 2019. This has had an estimated $4 million reduction to overall revenues. However, this reduction was offset by an estimated population increase of 24,000 new residents starting water and sewer service for a net zero impact. Our utility estimates that moving forward under current COVID conditions, commercial revenues will continue to be down by 10% on average until a vaccine is widely distributed and businesses return to pre-COVID restrictions. At that time, we estimate that a 3 to 5% of previous commercial revenue will not return to normal due to closed businesses. For operational impact, overall, our operations have not been greatly impacted by COVID-19. Key plant staff are all operating as normal, and office staff have continued to work a 1 week in the office, 1 week telecommuting schedule. We have also received CARES Act funding for the purchase of IT equipment for the transition to a mobile workforce. So looking at future budget adjustments, we've adjusted commercial revenues to reflect the long-term impacts of COVID-19 with a 10% commercial revenue reduction in 2021 and a 5% reduction from 2022 through 2025. We are also in the process of completing several major economic development projects which required issuing new debt. In order to cover our new debt service and continue to maintain our current infrastructure, we are able to pass an 11-year rate resolution at the end of October of this year. We have plans on closing on our first new set of bonds on December 15th, 2020. I'll now pass off to Karyn to share her utilities experience.
Thank you so much, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Karyn Riley with WSSC Water. We are Maryland's largest water utility, servicing 2 million customers in Prince George's and Montgomery counties, right outside of Washington, D.C. So like everyone else, we've experienced a lot of negative financial impact, differences in how our different customers, commercial versus residential, utilize water and how much they consume water. So we had to deal with those challenges and, like everyone else, pivot quite quickly on how we were addressing the financial shortfall that we had started to anticipate. So we can go to the next slide. We can give you a snapshot of where we are right now, year to year, and then also at the start of the pandemic versus where we are now. So as you can see, in March of 2020, we had about 77,000 past due accounts. They're up to 98,000 right now. And just for frame of reference, we have about 485,000 accounts with WSSC Water. Our past due amount, as you can see, has skyrocketed from $36 million pre-pandemic to $65 million year to year. Now, as we look at our financial impacts, we're making the adjustments again necessary as we go through our budget planning process. WSSC Water is a bit unique. We are a bi-county state agency, so our two county councils determine what our budget is. And every year they give us a set of spending affordability guidelines that we have to keep our budget within. Past projections said that this year for our fiscal 2022 budget, we would look between a 7 or 8% rate increase in order to cover all of our capital and operating expenses. But our counties have come back because they see the impact to their residents and told us that we can go no higher than 5.8%. So that's something that we're having to navigate. We haven't stopped with our work. Of course, it goes on. We have our frontline heroes who are out now fixing water main breaks that are popping up all over the place because of the cold weather here, but also some of our capital intensive projects. And again, another point of reference, WSSC Water has a $1.5 billion annual budget, capital and operating budget. So we go to the next slide, we'll show you how we worked with our customers on how we started addressing some of these shortfalls. First things first, we actually adopted a state of emergency at WSSC Water in recognition about how critical water is to public health and how critical it was for every one of our customers to have access to our safe, clean, reliable water in order to overcome and prevent the spread of COVID-19. So we actually adopted our state of emergency and put our own moratorium on turnoffs and shutoffs prior to the governor's executive order. As part of our work here internally, our general manager and CEO, Carla Reed, created a task force to look at customer affordability and engagement initiatives that we could do for the pandemic and also looking towards the future so that we could be better prepared for all of the issues that we knew we were going to have. So we took a look at three of our three things in order to make sure we were addressing the challenges that our vulnerable customers were having. We looked at our programs, our policies, and our publicity. We were very fortunate to already have in place a very robust affordability program. We had our customer assistance program, which waived fixed fees for our customers. That's administered in conjunction with the Office of Home Energy Programs. We also had a water fund where we give customers up to $500 a year towards their total bill. Those are income limited. In fact, we also had payment plans for based on income, or if you didn't meet a criteria, you didn't have to have a certain income criteria to access them. And we also had adjustments for leaks and high bills and things of that nature. So one of the things that we did is we looked at enhancing our affordability programs, getting more lenient pay plans. So those were things that were able to be done very quickly. We also took a look at our policies to make sure that they were able to be implemented very easily. So for instance, the statewide moratorium on late fees and more shutoffs has actually expired, but we have opted to extend ours so that we can make sure that everyone is having access to the water that they need. And of course, that causes some type of tension between our financial standing and what our social justice and public health mission is. So we are actually we lost about $6 million or late fees so far. We also have extended payment plan timelines. So if you were a non-cap customer, someone who didn't have the income to be a cap customer, you actually now have 36 months to pay back your past due amount as opposed to the 24 months that it was initially. And as far as publicizing our programs, we launched a Here to Help campaign, which just let our customers know that we had these things in place so they were not be afraid to call us and ask for assistance and access the assistance that we were able to provide. We also did things that helped influence customer behavior. So we had a big push, of course, with conservation tips to help customers reduce their consumption, since now as residential usage and consumption increase, we were working with our customers to identify ways they could proactively reduce how much water they use. We also were looking at things like don't flush the wipes in the pipes. I think a lot of water utilities have that, but that was really critical for us too, in order to protect our infrastructure and not have to incur emergency costs because of increased use of disinfecting wipes that people were flushing. And then another thing we did is had proactive customer outreach. Unlike a lot of water utilities who were able to access directly their CARES funding, we couldn't set up immediately our own utility assistance program, our own water utility assistance program. That's something we're still actually working with our counties on. And of course, we have no state or federal funding to address the affordability challenge that we are all facing. But one of the things we did through our collections and revenue recovery team is instead of calling people and saying, hey, your bill is past due, when can you pay? We were very proactive in saying, okay, here's what we have for you. Don't be afraid to call us. This is what we're going to be doing. So we identified those customers who were severely delinquent and made those calls to them and connected them with the right nonprofits, connected them with our people, connected them with the Salvation Army who administers our water fund to make sure that they had access to all of the assistance they could possibly have. So we did proactive targeted letters and calls with that. And the results, as you see, we had increased awareness of our programming through our social media and radio campaigns. We doubled the number of active payment plans, which is really critical because our data shows that if you're on a payment plan, you're less likely to be delinquent in your account or to even be so far behind that you can't access immediate help. Again, increased payment plan repayment time to 48 months. And then again, impact of lost revenue of $6 million in late fees, but it's something we look at as an investment to helping our customers be able to maintain their public health through access through water. So like everyone else, we still have concerns that this is not going to go away, that we're not going to be able to recover the revenue that we've lost, but we are trying to be as flexible as possible and make as much investment as fiscally possible in order to ensure that our customers have access to clean water.
Great, thank you, Karyn. At this time, we're going to go ahead and begin our panel discussion with the time that we have left. And we're going to do that with all of our presenters today. So I would invite them to turn on their cameras. We have received multiple questions prior to today's webinar, in addition to several questions that came through during the presentation. So we are going to go ahead and answer as many as possible, beginning with those that we received prior to today. For those that we don't get to, we will certainly follow up with responses via email in the coming days. And as a reminder, if you do have a question that you haven't yet submitted, please enter it in the Q&A box. And again, we'll get through as many as time allows. Our first question, Karyn, I'm going to start off with you, and then we're going to tack on a second question to this. But the first question is, how do you help customers escape the late fee and shutoff loop? Or do you anticipate it being a continuous cycle? I think you're muted, Karyn.
I see the box popped up. So the best way to help customers get out of that loop is really to work with them on a realistic payment plan and work with them in connecting them to other nonprofits if you all can't service them to help them address their core issue. So I'll give you an example. As I mentioned before, we administer our customer assistance program, which again waives the fixed fees on a customer's bill. We administer that with the Office of Home Energy Program. So by connecting the two together, if you're qualified for OHEAP, then you're qualified for our CAP program. Connecting the two together gives the customer that double assistance, because if you can't pay your water bill, more than likely you're struggling with other utility bills. So I think for us, going to the core issue, if it's a rental issue or mortgage assistance challenge, then that's something that needs to help be addressed as well. So our customer engagement team works and develops partnership with our county agencies, our state agencies, and nonprofits to help our customers with those issues as well. So I think that's how you get them out the loop.
Great, thank you. Karyn, I'm going to ask you to continue on with this question, and then I'm also going to ask Michael and Sylvia to jump in as well, because I think you all touched on this. What about alternatives to charging customers for shutoffs, late fees, and basically to encourage bill payment?
Again, I think that, and I know Michael touched on this, I think it's that proactive outreach. It's being able to call your customers and say, we have these things in place. A lot of times, again, that's that customer behavior issue that you're working on, that psychological thing. Customers are not going to be proactive necessarily in calling for a payment plan, whether it's frustration, it's embarrassment, that they're in the position where they have to ask for some assistance. So I think that if we as utilities can figure out a way to proactively have a conversation with those highly delinquent customers and show them what options are available, that is how you help them.
Michael, since Karyn pinged you, do you want to jump in on that?
Sure. So in our experience with COVID, it's shown that proactive communication is the key for moving back to locking off customers. So website updates, information on bills, direct contacts if possible with advance notice will help the customer prepare for making a payment. We've also found that if a customer knows that they can't be locked off and they also won't receive any late fees, that there was little motivation for them to pay. So the best motivation that we thought was to encourage bill payment is to continue to lock off customers, but offer as much assistance as possible with payment plans and removal of non-consumption related fees like late fees, reconnection, and lock-off fees.
Great, thank you. Sylvia, anything that you want to add to that?
No, not at this point. I think Michael and Karyn covered it.
Okay, great. So my next question, I'm actually going to tag you for, Sylvia. And this is a two-parter. What are pros and cons of writing off delinquent accounts? And is there criteria to consider before you begin write-offs?
Sure. I think many utilities have established policies and procedures that have been in place for many years. And this is, an unprecedented event where we need to look at what's realistically collectible in a different way than we have in the past, because we've gone months and months without locks. We really got to figure out, are we overstating or understating our account balances, what we really believe is collectible. And so I think this is an opportunity to have those conversations with the accountants and figure out, what is a methodology that we can use for this year. Not necessarily that it's going to be going forward, but to try to look at our account receivables and figure out how much is really truly collectible if we're not going to have the tools that we have had in place in the past, such as locking. If we resume locks and if there's funding available from other federal resources or state resources, or even mayor and council allocating additional funding, that's a factor that plays into how we determine what's uncollectible and collectible. So I think every utility has to look at their special circumstances and figure out really looking at what they believe is truly should be written off and the timing of that.
Great. And Henrietta, was there anything that you wanted to add to that?
Well, I just saw, Sam, that a question came in asking the panelists whether they had resumed those write-offs for collections yet.
Would each of you like to answer that?
Sure, I'll start. We haven't changed our process yet. So normally we send any collections to a collection agency to start with. And then it's probably 18 months to 2 years before an account actually gets written off of our balance sheet. So it's a prolonged time where it actually, when someone becomes delinquent, to it actually getting written off. And so we are starting to have conversations about, do we need to revise that policy in working with our business services division, to look at, do we need to change it? Or, if we're going to resume locks in January, what does that do to our receivables? I think there's still a lot of unknowns at this time.
Michael?
Sure. So during our moratorium of lockoffs through August, that we also halted any write-off of delinquent accounts. So once we resumed, we showed that it took about 2 to 3 months after our lockoffs were lifted to collect sufficient payments to return to our normal collection level. So we just wanted to make sure, if you write off too soon, you may be missing out on a lot of potential payments once you're able to lock off again.
Great.
And we haven't resumed them right now. I mean, that's something that we certainly are discussing along with arrearage forgiveness. So those are just things that we're looking at because, I mean, there is that reality that some of these accounts are not going to be able to be recovered. So we have to be proactive and also, again, balance how it will impact our bond ratings and things of that nature. But it's something we are discussing and we'll look at.
Great, thank you. John, I'm going to start with you on this next question, and then perhaps the utilities can weigh in. How are utilities beginning to determine their allowance for uncollectible accounts?
Well, I mean, I think it really depends on some of the policies that utilities have put in place. So, for example, writing off policies relating to writing off arrearages, policies related to extending payment plans for delinquent accounts, and giving customers more time to pay. I think those types of policies impact how the how the accounting policy or the accounting allowances are set, but and that really depends from utility to utility on what those policies are.
Any of the utility panelists want to weigh in any more on that? Okay. I think we are close on time. So there is one other question. Henrietta, this is actually for you. Does Raftelis have any plans to survey utilities again about COVID-19 impacts, or will any other resources be provided, as this is a topic of significance?
Thanks, Sam. That's a good question. As Piper talked about in the beginning of the presentation, we know that all of you have some survey fatigue and lots of people are trying to find out more about what utilities are experiencing and try to use the lessons learned to help the industry. We would like to survey again to get updated data and see how things are changing over time. As you've heard from the three panelists today, there are indeed changes as the pandemic has progressed. But we're gonna, like I said, I think we would like to do that in the future, but we're sort of weighing the survey exhaustion. But we certainly have some more data to mine from this survey, and we'll be publishing more about that in future points, and are also hoping to hold more discussions about delinquency and the solutions to it at a future time in another webinar. So we'll definitely be continuing to think and talk about the issue and how the data gathering goes. I'm not quite sure of that yet.
Okay, great, thank you. So to be mindful of time, I think we're going to conclude the panel discussion. So thank you, Karyn, Michael, Sylvia, and John. Henrietta, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thanks, Sam. And I also, from the bottom of my heart, thank our panelists for your time in contributing thoughtful responses today. We wanted to close by stressing that our partners at AMWA and NACWA are focused on mitigating the impacts of COVID in supporting utilities through the crisis. And in preparation for the webinar, we asked both organizations to help us share what they're doing to help advocate on behalf of utilities. And so we have a few things to share here. AMWA and NACWA told us that they are telling Congress that drinking water and wastewater systems must be explicitly eligible for direct federal assistance to close revenue gaps that have emerged as a result of the pandemic and its economic fallout. And both organizations support federal assistance to low-income drinking water and wastewater customers to help pay their bills, both during the pandemic and once things return to normal. The membership of AMWA and NACWA do not believe a federal water disconnection moratorium is necessary or appropriate, as the vast majority of drinking water and wastewater systems have voluntarily paused non-payment disconnections during the pandemic, as you saw even in the survey. And these decisions are best made with the full consideration of local circumstances rather than a blanket federal restriction. NACWA and AMWA have been working to steer the federal moratorium conversation toward a fuller discussion of the costs of providing clean and drinking water services and what water affordability challenges mean for utilities and their customers. And the organizations are telling Congress that any federal action in this area must be tied to funding assistance, and the duration of any federal moratorium must be limited to the duration of COVID-19's public health emergency. With the new administration and Congress coming in, the drinking water and clean water sectors are urging that federal water investment be a top priority.
Great. Thank you. And a big thank you to everyone who joined us for today's presentation. We want to thank our presenters once again for sharing your insight and expertise. And also thank you to AMWA and NACWA again for your partnership in this effort. As a reminder, the webinar has been recorded and a link along with a summary of survey results will be emailed to you for future viewing and review. And we'll also provide a link to a brief survey for your feedback about the presentation and to answer any remaining questions you have. If you do have additional questions or would like to connect directly with Raftelis or any of our presenters, please feel free to reach out using the contact information on this slide. And we thank you again for joining us, for your time, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. This concludes our presentation.